Friends, come on in. Please take your seats. Welcome. Welcome. Come on in. I'd like to invite Sandy Kaplan, the president of our brotherhood, to come on up. Let's hear it for Sandy.
So we want to welcome all of you here and hope that you who attended likes the breakfast, because there was a lot of effort to put into that. So I guess, well, you all know who they are, but if you, you're in a different order this time too. So in the center is our host, Rabbi.
Remember my name?
I remember your name.
Oh, okay.
Want to say? Oh, no, say. Rabbi Stoller, and here Rabbi Polakov, and Rabbi Stecker. So we all know them anyway. So if you remember, it was a month or so ago, Saturday Night Live said we're going to have our 50th anniversary show. So it got me thinking, what's the anniversary here? So this has been going on for a long time. So we did a little bit, I guess, non-AI research, and if that's allowed now. And back in the 80s, we had Rabbi Davidson and Rabbi Waxman, and Rabbi Polakov kept popping up. No matter how far back we went, he was there. So I'm not sure when he started, and we know that Rabbi Wolf was before him. So I don't know when you started, if you can remember, or maybe he doesn't want to say. But in any event, it was nice that once a year, no matter where we have it, the community comes together and wants to hear differing perspectives on the topics of the day. So it's nice that we had a good turnout, and the event is alive and well. So let's turn it over to you, I guess, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Sandy. Welcome, everyone. We're delighted to have you here at Temple Beth-El for this annual Rabbinic Dialogue. This is my first time as the host rabbi since I've been in Great Neck, so I feel very honored and privileged to welcome my colleagues, Rabbi Polakov and Rabbi Stecker, here to join me for the dialogue. We'd like to begin with a prayer, and I'll invite Rabbi Stecker to lead us.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for the invitation. And by the way, I'm just going to point out, Rabbi Stoller, I appreciate the gracious welcome, but you did take the coolest microphone for yourself. So I'm going to try to manage with this, less august version. So we thought, as we were preparing for this morning, that it would be entirely appropriate for us to begin offering prayers for Israel, for her well-being, for the release of those hostages who remain, for Israel ultimately to be able to live in peace and security with her neighbors. Avinu shebashamayim tzur Yisrael v'go'alo barech et medinat Yisrael reshit tzmichat ge'ulatenu. We ask God, the Rock of Israel, to bless the state of Israel, which promises redemption. Elohei Yisrael, Tzur Yisrael v'go'alo, El Rachum v'chanun b'tfilah v'tachanunim, anu ponim elecha lachzir b'shalom levatehem et yikirei amcha hashvuyim v'hane'edarot shene'ekru b'yad zidonit mibatehem v'nechtefu el eretz oyev. God of Israel, our Rock and Redeemer, God of mercy and compassion, we pray, we plead that you return these precious and beloved people, the captured and the missing, who have cruelly and heartlessly been torn from their homes and carried off to our enemy's territory. We beseech you, Adonai, quickly fulfill your word. I am with you. I will watch over you wherever you go, and I will restore our people to their home. Amen.
Amen. Yasher koach. Thank you, Rabbi. Well, so when we set out to plan our conversation for today, I took in a lot of advice from people in the community. And the number one piece of advice that people have given is, we want you guys to disagree. So we sat down to figure out, how we could disagree, right? Our topic for today is halacha and tikkun olam in our respective traditions. Now you look at those or that title and say, well, are they going to disagree? And the answer is yes, we're definitely going to disagree. So I want to frame the conversation today by saying that our goal in the conversation is for each of us to be able to articulate our respective philosophies about these topics, halacha and tikkun olam, their interrelationship, what they mean to us within our respective Jewish traditions, and how our ideas manifest in daily life and practice. So in order to do that, we had a couple of great planning conversations, and we came to an agreement that the way to start this conversation was to pick a topic, an issue, that will enable us each to explain our perspectives on halacha and tikkun olam in the clearest possible way, and in a way that draws clear distinctions between each of our viewpoints. That issue that we're going to start with is the issue of homosexuality. Now, I want to state that it is not our intention that the entire conversation focus on homosexuality, but that's where we're going to start. And I imagine that it'll lead us into conversation about a variety of different Jewish issues, so that you can kind of get a sense of how each of us approaches them, where we're coming from. So I want to begin, I think, with the dean of this panel, because you've been in Great Neck the longest, Rabbi Polikoff. I just want to invite you to tell us about your perspective as an Orthodox rabbi on halacha and tikkun olam, and how the issue of homosexuality and anything else that you'd like to speak about manifests for you.
Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Rabbi Stoller, for that welcome. It's an honor to be here with my colleagues and with all of you this morning. Just to set the record straight, I have been in Great Neck for 37 years. According to some, it feels like only 2 days, Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av. But I have been here for 37 years, and I will tell you that this rabbinic dialogue began before I arrived. The initial rabbinic dialogue was between Rabbi Waxman, Rabbi Davidson, and Rabbi Lerner from the Young Israel of Great Neck, in no particular order. But that's where the dialogue began. I remember reading about this dialogue when I was still a rabbi in Congregation Kehillat Jeshurun in the city, reading about this dialogue, which made, obviously, at that time, the front pages of the Jewish media, because it was such a novel idea at the time. I think it relatively is still a novel idea. It doesn't happen in so many communities. But it does predate me here, and I'm glad to be part of this and to continue with this dialogue. I never quite understood why it was a dialogue. There's 3 of us speaking, but I guess it just became the expression. So I'm glad to be here and welcome a welcome guest here at Temple Beth-El, and express our appreciation from Great Neck Synagogue to our host, to Temple Beth-El, for opening up their beautiful facility to all of us here today. Let me tell you a little bit about how the Orthodox movement that I represent understands the terminology of halacha and tikkun olam. I'll try to relate it to the question of homosexuality, since that was something that we had discussed in our pre-meeting plans. But I don't want to focus on homosexuality. Homosexuality is a difficult issue, certainly a socially charged issue that affects many, many, many people in both in our community and outside of our community. So I don't want to make this a discussion about homosexuality per se, but simply to use it as a way to illustrate the interface between halacha and tikkun olam. And I think you will hear clearly as the morning progresses how each one of us views this very differently. So for an Orthodox Jew, for a Jew who subscribes to the tradition of Torah min hashamayim, that the Torah is divinely given to the Jewish people, and the manifestation of the understanding of that Torah is based on an oral tradition, which we call Torah shebichtav, an oral tradition, the written tradition of Torah shebichtav, the oral tradition of Torah sheba'al peh, which gets interpreted throughout the generations by the rabbis. That is what determines halacha. So if I want to know, can I use a microwave oven on Shabbat? I look in the entire 5 books of Moses, and I will not find any reference to a microwave oven. I will look through the entire collection of the Talmud, and I will not find any indication in the Talmud about a microwave oven. So what am I supposed to do? So I will turn to the rabbinic leaders within whom we as Orthodox Jews have invested authority, and I will ask them, what is the halacha? What does Jewish law say about using a microwave oven on Shabbat? And these Jewish scholars, these rabbinic leaders, who themselves have expressed a loyalty to Jewish tradition, will give me an answer based on their understanding of the principles through which a microwave oven works. That is halacha. It is a very much a living, breathing system. It did not stop with the codification of the Talmud. It did not stop even with the codification of the most classic of works of Jewish halacha, namely the Shulchan Aruch, but rather it continues to unfold until this very day. Until this very day. And it continues to unfold in some very dramatic ways. Dramatic ways such as, how does the Orthodox movement relate to individuals who are transgender? How does the Orthodox movement, where does someone who self-identifies as a woman but was born a man, where does that individual sit in the Orthodox synagogue? And this is indeed issues that many Orthodox congregations grapple with, because after all, we are part of society, and these issues manifest themselves even within the Orthodox movement. And how do we get an answer to that? We turn to the decisors of halacha, of Jewish law, and we ask them for their guidance, for what we call their psak halacha, their determination. And that is how we relate to all of the issues that face the Jewish community from the perspective of a challenge or a question as to how halacha deals with these particular issues. The concept of tikkun olam, which for the Orthodox, I believe, is a much less compelling principle than it is for my other colleagues. Tikkun olam actually, in a traditional understanding, was used in a very narrow sense. It was used to basically ensure that society functioned. And when I say that society functioned, it was used to ensure that Jewish society functioned. Meaning, as I'm sure some of you are aware, perhaps many of you, there is a biblical precept known as the observance of Shemitah, the sabbatical year. And in the sabbatical year, which occurs every 7 years, there are certain laws that need to be observed. Those laws relate to the way in which the produce of the land is treated. There is another requirement, which is known as Yovel. Yovel is the Jubilee. We don't celebrate or observe Yovel these days because the majority of Jews in the world do not yet live in Israel, although we are getting close. And what will happen then will be very interesting. But we don't observe Yovel today. But one of the principles of Yovel at the time that it was observed was that all debts would be forgiven. And what's the problem with that? The problem would be, let's say that someone approached me in the 46th year and said, could I borrow $100,000? I might be very hesitant to hand that over to the individual. Why? Because I would be concerned that what would happen? What would happen would be that those debts would be forgiven when that final Shemitah year came in. Those debts would be forgiven, and I would be left owed $100,000 and nobody obligated to pay me back. So the rabbis instituted a concept which some of you might have heard of, known as prosbul. Prosbul essentially transfers the debt from an individual to the Beit Din. It enabled society to function. That was the classic interpretation of Tikkun Olam, to enable the Jewish society to function. This idea of Tikkun Olam took on a much broader meaning, certainly during the time of the Kabbalists, of Isaac Luria, took on a different meaning of Tikkun Olam, meaning to repair the world, to fix a broken world in which we live. And today, the concept of Tikkun Olam has been embraced by some in the Jewish community, particularly my colleagues, I believe, to be a trumpeting call of social justice that modifies, according to some, or replaces, according to others perhaps, what halakha says. From an Orthodox perspective, Tikkun Olam does not replace or modify halakha. Halakha remains the overarching concern. Tikkun Olam is a consideration that we have. How we understand Tikkun Olam, I am sure, will become clearer as we move through the morning. Let me just turn in just a few minutes to the question of homosexuality. And that is the interface between halakha and homosexuality. And Tikkun Olam, how would we apply that to the questions of homosexuality? So first, the question is, what is the view of halakha vis-a-vis homosexuality? And the view of halakha vis-a-vis homosexuality is a relatively clear view, and that is that an act of homosexuality between two men is considered a violation of halakha. That is a very clear, unambiguous position that halakha espouses. The question is, how do we deal with such a situation? If a person professes a predisposition to homosexuality and engages in homosexual behaviors, one male with another, how does the Orthodox community view that? The Orthodox community views that as a transgression of halakha. Does that mean that we shun the individual? Does that mean that we lock the doors and don't allow that person into the synagogue? No, not at all. Just like there are people who violate Shabbat, who we welcome into the synagogue with open arms. There are people who violate the laws of kashrut. We welcome them into the synagogue with open arms. So too, someone who violates the biblical prohibition of homosexuality would be welcomed into the synagogue with open arms. However, their behavior would not be condoned, just like we would not condone a violation of Shabbat or a person who is not eating according to the laws of kashrut. Tikkun Olam would not be a factor in how we would relate to that.
Thank you, Rabbi Polikoff. That was a brilliant explanation. I very much appreciate it. Rabbi Stecker.
Okay, thank you, and Yesher Koach Chazak u'Baruch to Rabbi Polikoff. So as you were speaking, I was thinking, well, there's much that you said that I agree with, that halakha is living and breathing, that there are circumstances that warrant the halakha facing new realities. But I think that where we diverge are the parameters of those issues that require a rethinking of the traditional halachic approach. So for me, it's not just a matter of in the 20th century we have microwaves and we didn't used to. We have amniocentesis so that a woman who is pregnant can discover the genetic makeup of the fetus that she is carrying, and we didn't used to. It's also an appreciation of the fact that attitudes change, that moral approaches to certain situations change. And I would also say that the halakha has always been mindful of the larger picture. So I look at halakha as the framework. I look at halakha as the system that we engage in order to face the world. And I look at tikkun olam as being, yes, in that Lurianic sense, putting the pieces back together. There's a metaphor that when the world was created, there was a shattering that took place, and we need to put those pieces back together. So when I say the larger picture, I'm reminded of a story that took place. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was walking with one of his students as the temple was burning. And the student said to him, I am so depressed. Now that the temple is burning, how are we going to be able to achieve kapara, to achieve atonement? And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, don't worry, we don't need the temple to achieve atonement. We can achieve atonement through the kindness of our actions. Now, what did Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai demonstrate? In my estimation, it's that you have to be mindful of what the purpose is and not allow the structure to dictate the purpose, but allow the purpose, the vision, how do you want the world to look, to impact and be in conversation with the structure. So let me say a few words addressing the question of homosexuality. So, first of all, we take a breath and recognize that this impacts real people, that people are constituted, we have an understanding of an orientation, we have an understanding that there are people who are largely, if not exclusively, finding their erotic and also emotional and spiritual, and I'm going to get back to that, connections to be most deeply felt with those of the same gender, and others, most people perhaps, who find that to be the case with the opposite gender. So how would I, operating within the framework as a conservative rabbi, approach this issue? I would say that when we're thinking about sexuality, remember, it's not just about the physical. It's not just about can you do this act or can you not do this act. It's about taking a human being and regardless of that person's sexuality, saying, how can we provide a framework in which this person can sanctify their physical and emotional and spiritual urges? Because homosexuality is not just about sex, any more than heterosexuality is just about sex. And if you think about what we do, which is so brilliant and it's accrued over the generations with a straight couple, we're not saying to them, have sex tonight, and that's the wedding ceremony. We're saying to them, you are part of a larger picture that takes us from the bliss of Gan Eden to the ultimate redemption. That's what the 7 blessings, the Sheva Brachot, do. And your physicality and your spirituality and your emotional connection to each other will help to move that forward. So I want to be able to deliver that same message and to present that same arc of sanctity and also, frankly, of expectation to any human being, regardless of their sexual orientation. And I would like to conclude for now by saying that I find it personally sad that some within the Jewish community would seek to circumscribe the parameters of halakha to the point that some of the humanity, some of the parts that don't fit so neatly into a box, some things which transcend the yes or the no that sometimes can constrain a legal system. It saddens me that in some parts of the community, my understanding, there hasn't been a fuller embrace of the totality of humanity and what we're trying to accomplish by making the world a little bit better every day through our actions.
Yasher Koach. Thank you for that wonderful explanation, Rabbi Stecker. So speaking as a Reform rabbi and representing the Reform traditions, such as I can, and it's a little more difficult for me as a Reform rabbi to be able to do that because one of the core principles of Reform Judaism is individual autonomy. And because we are driven by individual autonomy, that means that every Reform Jew and every Reform rabbi has the ultimate right and responsibility to make their own religious decisions and decide their own perspective. So I say that so that you know that when I present my perspective on it, there are many of my colleagues and fellow Reform Jews who have different perspectives. And in Reform Judaism, that's okay. In fact, that's healthy, based on the way we see our religious philosophy. So I want to start by defining the two concepts of halakha and tikkun olam from my perspective as a Reform rabbi. And it's interesting, Rabbi Polakov, I think the way you defined it, in some ways, we have a mirror image where you spoke about halakha as paramount and tikkun olam as secondary in this equation. In the Reform community, I would say it's the opposite, that tikkun olam is paramount, halakha is secondary. Now, I have many rabbinic colleagues in the Reform movement who would say that halakha almost doesn't matter at all. Now, I disagree with them. I have a particular love for halakha. In fact, I've done graduate work in the field. I'm all but dissertation in modern halakha. I don't think I'll ever write the dissertation, though, but yeah. In any case, I do love it and have a great appreciation, but not all Reform rabbis do, and not all Reform Jews do. So I put that out there as well. I'll tell you why I have great appreciation and love for halakha. There is a scholar, a modern scholar of halakha by the name of Chaim Seiman, who puts forth a kind of a twofold way of thinking about halakha, which we typically translate as Jewish law. So Seiman says that halakha functions on two levels. One level is halakha as regulation. By that he means halakha in the conventional way we think of law, rules that tell you what to do, rules that you have to follow, that regulate your life. Okay? In Reform Judaism, halakha as regulation has very little resonance, I would say. We as Reform Jews don't look to halakha as law in the conventional way we think of it in the English term, as rules that you have to follow. We look at it rather as a store of wisdom that offers guidance and insight and perspective on how Jews collectively over time have done things, but not as a binding law. Now, the other aspect of halakha that Seiman speaks about is halakha as Torah. And halakha as Torah resonates much more with us as Reformed Jews. So halakha as Torah, by that he means that halakha is a form of discourse. It's a language that we as Jews use to speak about everything about life and about being human and about our relationship with each other and with God. Just like Christians use the language of systematic theology to talk about the meaning of life and how we interact with the world, we Jews use the language of law, the vocabulary, the concepts of law. That's how we talk, in other words. But embedded within the halakha is philosophy, theology, culture, values, all kinds of things. And we study it and engage with it to mine the halakha for all of those things that enable us to construct a lens, a Jewish lens, through which we can look at the world. So that's halakha, I think, in a Reform context. Tikkun olam, we think of as a moral imperative. Whereas halakha provides guidance for living and interacting and understanding, tikkun olam, as we see it, is about morality. It's the imperative to do good, to do what is right. Now, what you can see from that is that, by definition, we as Reformed Jews understand that there is morality that exists outside of the halakha. Okay? Halakha is not itself exhaustive when it comes to morality. Tikkun means to fix, and we recognize that in some cases, many cases maybe, the halakha, the halachic consensus that is developed over time, is insufficient because it doesn't meet the test of morality. So tikkun olam is the imperative to fix it. And it can be fixed within the context of a system, but not always. Sometimes it has to be fixed outside the context of the system. In other words, when halakha comes up short on the question of morality, we have an imperative to move beyond it. So let me speak about homosexuality for the moment, because this is a great example of how this works in Reform Judaism. I agree wholeheartedly with Rabbi Polakov that the halachic consensus that has formed over centuries on the question of homosexuality is unequivocal in that halakha disallows homosexuality between men. It's really hard to work around that. I mean, centuries of precedent, really no disagreement, makes it definitive. So I could look at that and say, as some Orthodox writers have done, thinkers have done, and say, well, to a homosexual, I empathize with you, but there's nothing I can do. The halakha is the halakha. So, for example, Yeshayahu Leibovitz, an Orthodox thinker, has written about this. I mean, there were letters written to him by homosexual men, Orthodox men, who said, I am devoted to God and Torah and halakha, and I'm doing everything that I can to follow the halakha, but I am a homosexual, I'm attracted to men, there's nothing I can do about that. Can you help me? What should I do? And Leibovitz said exactly this. He said, I empathize with your feelings. This is your lot in life. And the halakha is the halakha. So your calling is to restrain yourself from sinning. I'm sorry. There's edification in restraining your desires. Go and be well. Well, Reformed Judaism says, no. That doesn't work. The halachic consensus comes up short. It is immoral to hold that a homosexual person, by engaging in their sexual desires the way they were created, it is untenable for us to say, they're good people, but they are just in transgression. They are in breach with God. We say, no, this requires tikkun. And if we can't fix it within the context of the system, we have to fix it outside the context of the system and say that people are created, we know from science that people are created this way, and we don't look at them as just being in breach. God wanted them to be this way. Homosexuality is an affirmative good because they are created b'tselem Elohim. That's how we address it. So, I don't know, Rabbi Polikoff, I want to invite any kind of response. Yeah.
Sure. So thank you both. Interesting to hear in our public discourse. I certainly am appreciative of your sensitivity to the trials and tribulations of individuals within our community. And to the extent possible, I share that sensitivity. But there's something that eludes me in understanding where both of you come from. I think, Rabbi Stoller, you mentioned it much more explicitly than Rabbi Stecker, although he made a reference to it at the beginning. So I would ask each of you to help me and perhaps us understand where your sense of morality comes from. In other words, if you say that morality is independent of halacha, and morality is a value that, in your case, Rabbi Stoller, trumps halacha, and Rabbi Stecker, I'm not sure you would agree with that, but in your case probably modifies halacha, or somehow changes the halachic process. My question to each of you is, where does your morality come from? What defines your moral decisions? So maybe we can start with that and move from that point.
I'll be happy to jump in. Thank you. So first of all, as you were both talking, I was sort of thinking to myself, okay, here's where I agree, and here are things that I disagree with and even find, deeply troubling. So the comparison between somebody who acts on their sexuality and somebody who transgresses Shabbat or Kashrut, I find troubling. And even though I don't think you meant it this way, it actually lands offensively on my ear to compare something which I think comes from a place of total autonomy. I will eat this or not eat this. I will do this on the seventh day or not do this, to something which is so deeply rooted in how a person is constituted. But in terms of where morality comes from, I'll say two things. First, I fell asleep in college when I was studying Immanuel Kant, so my sense of the categorical imperative is a little rusty. But overall, this notion that Hillel, the sage, said, what is hateful to you, don't do to somebody else, sounds like a pretty good place to start. So if we're going to start from that perspective, would I want to have an aspect of my essence be in effect not denied in terms of recognizing it exists, but told there's no way for you to sanctify it the way that other people sanctify theirs, to be told by Yeshaya Leibovitz, I know this is going to be really hard, but it's going to be good for you. So just spend your life and deny. I wouldn't want that to happen to me, so I don't think that I would want to impose that on somebody else. I would not want myself to be thrown off of a building because of my orientation. And let's not kid ourselves. There are places in the world where, if we are on this topic, where LGBT people are abused and massacred, etc. And since I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of it, I wouldn't want to be on the giving end of it. And I certainly would not want to impose that kind of pain on somebody else. Now, I maintain, and here is where the two of you, in a way, by expressing your precision, some people might view that as being preferable. In other words, halakha trumps morality, or I say that the halakha is moral no matter what, and morality trumps halakha. I think the two have been in conversation with each other in subtle ways for generations. So I'll give an example. Torah says explicitly, a person has ben sorero moreh, stubborn and rebellious child. You take that child, you stone the child if the child doesn't listen to their parents. And the rabbis, I mean, it's in Masechet Sanhedrin, it's incredible. There's law after law after law. For this to happen, the mother and the father need to speak in the same voice. They need to, the child needs to be a certain age, a slight window, etc., right? So what are they doing here? Now, you could say, well, that's just what they thought the Torah meant. And I'll say to you, okay. But what I'd really like to say is that they were undergoing the same struggle that I just described, which is this seems immoral. I would not want to be stoned because I didn't listen to my parents. And therefore, I don't think I should be on the giving end of that. And so they came up with ways. Now, yes, you could say the category exists, but they just found ways to make nobody fit the category. Okay, I get it. But what's behind it? Behind it is their moral trouble with something that the Torah describes. The Torah again and again and again asks for, and by that I mean the written Torah, Torah shebichtav, again and again calls for capital punishments. Somebody kills somebody, you put him to death. Someone does this, you put him to death. And the rabbi said that a court that put one person to death in 70 years was considered murderous. They, in my view, rebelled against what seems to be the simple understanding of the Torah, the pshat, its contextual meaning, if you want to look at it that way. And they found ways to diverge from it, and I would argue because of their moral sense. So for me, it's not the halakha is here and tikkun olam is here. It is always been in conversation. We have always looked to our own moral sensibilities as rabbis, and in my view, courageously, we have found a way to have them in conversation so that the things that we're inflicting on other people aren't things that we wouldn't want for ourselves.
Thank you, Rabbi Stecker. And thanks for the question, Rabbi Polikoff, because I think this question of the relationship between halacha and morality, law and morality, is really at the heart of this. So I agree with what Rabbi Stecker is saying. I think pretty much in full. And you know what you pointed out, Rabbi Stecker, about this sense of morality as distinct from the Torah being present already within the minds of the sages, I think is definitely true. The Ben Sorero Moreh is the stubborn and rebellious son is an excellent example of it. We had a scholar in residence here last June. Her name is Christine Hayes. She's a brilliant scholar of the Talmud, and she argues that the covenant, the dynamic embedded in the covenant is dialogical, meaning that the Jewish people are supposed to be in conversation with God about, as a part of the enterprise of creating the halakha, creating the Torah. And the stubborn and rebellious son is an example of that. The sages read the text about stoning the stubborn and rebellious son, and they say, wait a minute, there is something obviously wrong about this. It is immoral. Now, they believe God would not tell us something that's not moral, so clearly this text needs refining. And that's what they did. Through the process of interpretation, they refined it and came out on the other side of essentially rendering the stubborn and rebellious son a legal fiction that could never really be enacted. That's how they addressed it. There are two principles in the halakha that indicate the sage's awareness of this. One is the principle of kavod habriot. It means honor for God's creations. That halakhic decision-making is sometimes driven by what is good and right for people. And I would say, like, the treatment of homosexuals, it's kavod habriot. I mean, these are people. This is how they're created. Do what's right for people. Another principle, and Rabbi, maybe you can remind me, I can't remember the Hebrew phrase, but the principle is it's time to set aside the Torah and do what's right.
Eight lasot Lashem?
Yeah. Sometimes
time to act on God's behalf.
On God's behalf. There's
and
a
overturn the Torah.
That's right, to overturn the Torah. There is a recognition by the sages that sometimes the Torah does come up short, and within the halakhic process itself, you have to just put it aside and do what's right. The sages already understood that there is a distinction sometimes between morality and the tradition. They fix it within the context of the system. But the source of their morality, what is it? It's not the text in these cases. It's something else. Is it instinct? Is it natural law? Is it some awareness that it's off kilter? And they act from that standpoint. So as a student of legal theory, here's what I would say. Legal theory, modern legal theory teaches us, in some schools of it anyway, that law is a tool that judges and practitioners of it can use and do use to create reality. In other words, people who are adept at the law can use the language and the concepts and the rules of law to come up with any interpretation that they want. The question is not whether can they come up with it. The question is whether they can sell it to their community. And if they can, it becomes the new law. We see the sages already fixing these problems, like the stubborn and rebellious son, by doing that. So my question is, why haven't they fixed the issue of homosexuality within the law? They could if they wanted to. That's the insight of realist legal theory. You can come up with any interpretation you want if you're determined and you're adept and you can sell it to your community. My opinion, and I recognize this is controversial, and I don't mean this in any offensive way, but I want to say it, that my opinion is if, Orthodox halakha wanted to reinterpret the law to address the homosexuality issue in a favorable way, they could. They don't because they don't want to.
So can I follow up on... Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think probably it would be good.
I'm sorry.
Probably good for me to answer that question and jump in here.
Please.
I actually had a follow-up to that to just deepen the question.
Sure,
if that's
go ahead.
Okay.
Slug away.
Yeah. So, there is an expression. I mean, I think many of us may be familiar with Blue Greenberg, who described herself as an Orthodox Jewish feminist. She said something, I'm not even sure how I feel, but it's kind of an articulation of what you said, namely, where there is a rabbinic will, there is a halachic way. So that's what she said. But I just want to add one other thing, and I really am saying this just in an effort to understand. You said, Rabbi Polikoff, earlier, that the pros bulls, so Hillel came up with this notion that the courts would hold the money, and so people would keep lending even towards the ends of the 7-year cycle because that's what was necessary to enable society to function. So what I'm wondering aloud is, so it's important to do that to enable society to function. But when it comes, for example, to women who are trapped in marriages, women who are agunot and whose husbands won't give them a get, or to people who are trapped because they cannot sanctify their sexuality completely, are we saying that they're not important enough parts of society, that their functioning doesn't matter as much as the ability to lend towards the 7th year? And I'm just amplifying. And we don't mean to be piling up on you, but just amplifying the question that Rabbi Stoller said about the response of the Orthodox community.
Okay, it's lonely up here, so let me push. I'm gonna push a little bit more against my colleagues because I don't think that either one of them, despite their eloquent language, answered the question as to where morality comes from. What I heard from both Rabbi Stecker and Rabbi Stoller is, here's an example of where morality comes from. Let's look at the Talmud, right? Let's look at what the rabbis did in the Talmud, and that's an indication of morality. I believe both of them said that. I don't know, you heard the same words I heard, but that's what I heard them say. So if I'm wrong, I'm sure they'll correct me about that. And I agree that morality can be understood from the pages of the Talmud, because the Talmud represents a tradition very much a part of what Jewish tradition is all about. I'm sure I don't need to remind anyone in this room that homosexuality did not start in the 20th century. Homosexuality was perhaps even more prevalent in societies before our own society, before the time in which we live. To say that the rabbis didn't need to deal with homosexuality is simply misinformation. And I want to press you both on where your definitions of morality come from. Are you suggesting that it's up to each rabbi to make the determination of what is morality, and then to manipulate halakha, in your words, Rabbi Stecker, or trump halakha, in your words, Rabbi Stoller, when that particular rabbi defines what is moral? In other words, if you have a colleague, Rabbi Stoller, who lives in some other community, who believes that it is moral to abuse women, that's his belief, because maybe that was the home he was raised in, I don't know, but he believes that there's nothing immoral about that. Does he have the right to trump halakha, in your view, because of that? And Rabbi Stecker, what determines morality? You very nicely brought the example from the Talmud, with which I agree, but what defines morality today? If you have conservative colleagues who believe that it is immoral to marry someone of another faith, then who defines that morality? Is it you, or is it them, or is it something bigger than both of you?
Thank you, Rabbi. Yeah, I'll get, if I can answer first. Thank you. Excellent questions and great points. And I think this points to another important difference between, Orthodoxy and Reform, at least. And so, what is a source of morality? So, to me, and I think to us in Reform Judaism, the sources of morality are instinct, are our own perceptions of the world based on experience. Morality is influenced by the culture and the context in which we live. Morality is shaped by, I think, what we perceive to be natural law, meaning there are certain truths that are out there that are just right. So, like, for instance, abusing children does not comport with natural law. We don't know that because it's written on any page. We just know it. And a lot of times those things coincide with the halakha, but not always. And it's when they don't that, is where the rubber meets the road in terms of how we respond to it. I think Orthodoxy would, as you're describing it and as I understand it, would respond to those instances by looking back, to the pages of the Talmud and to the Shulchan Aruch and the contemporary responsa and so forth. In other words, to external authorities that the community has vested its authority in. prominent poskim, halachic decision makers who have great reputations as scholars and texts and so forth, external authorities to say, this is a difficult question, let's look at what they said, and then that will be binding upon us. In Reform Judaism, we don't do it that way. Authority, we don't vest authority in books or in other people. As I said at the beginning, the core guiding principle, or one of the core guiding principles of Reform Judaism, is individual autonomy. So our ultimate religious authority is invested in the individual self. And so we would look to the texts and what prominent rabbis have to say, but we would say, and we would take that as guidance and as important information, but ultimately we would make the decisions for ourselves. Now, if there were a rabbi out there who was saying, in my opinion, abusing children is moral, it goes back to to what I said. Like, I'm sure someone like that, if they're clever, could come up with some interpretation of the Torah that would suggest that. Just like someone could read the Torah and say, well, the Torah condones slavery. And rabbis did do that in the 19th century in America. But what makes for a valid interpretation? The interpretive community has to accept it. And I cannot imagine any interpretive community of Reformed Jews ever accepting an interpretation that sanctioned child abuse as moral.
So I appreciate that. I'm gonna go out on a limb here, since I'm a little bit older than my colleagues. I want to tell you about when I grew up. I grew up in Philadelphia, and when I grew up, and I used to visit my grandparents, they had something hanging on the wall called a cat of nine tails. Have any of you ever heard of that? Show me just raise your hands if you've heard of it. Okay, so you know what it is?
Yeah.
Okay. What was it used for? It was used to discipline children. Okay, thank God my parents did not have a cat of nine tails hanging in their house. But I will tell you, on more than one occasion, a flip or sarcastic or disrespectful comment that I might have made in a moment of insanity was met by a physical reminder that is inappropriate behavior. So today, children call the authorities when their parents hit them and say, I'm the victim of child abuse. I don't believe that I was the victim of child abuse, and I don't believe that my parents were the victims of child abuse. But if morality depends on how society defines things, so this is a slippery slope, Rabbi Stoller, because morality 2 generations ago defined child abuse much differently than morality today defines child abuse. And that's just one example. If you don't have your morality rooted in something, and instead it becomes rooted in the community or the society in which we live, so then if genital mutilation of females is considered acceptable and even commendable within society, what does your morality say about that? I'm not challenging you personally, just asking the question.
Okay, so
Rabbi Stecker, feel free.
No, thank you all. This is good. By the way, just to take the pulse, are we disagreeing enough to make this exciting for you? Are we okay? All right, good. Thank goodness, because we aim to please or maybe displease. I don't know. So when Rabbi Polakov uses the expression "slippery slope," I'm very sensitive to that expression, because the expression slippery slope is often used by people to try to prevent changes from taking place that need to take place. And that's not a good thing. So let me be a little bit more specific. Some things should change. And my teacher, Rabbi Elliot Dorff, said, we have a responsibility to distinguish between cases. We cannot simply say, well, now it's two men, and next week it's going to be a man and a giraffe. Ha, ha, ha. Right? That's not an appropriate thing to say. I know you didn't say that. But in other words, this notion that, well, you do this, at least to this, at least to this, at least to this. At every step, we have a responsibility to distinguish between cases, and we might actually disagree over certain things. I am certainly glad that your parents didn't have that hanging in your house. And going back to what I said, I did give an answer. It might not be sufficient when it comes to morality. And that is a good place to start, is what we don't want to be on the receiving end of, we shouldn't be on the giving end of. That to me makes sense. If I would not want to be stuck in a marriage because the person that I married needed to give consent and people needed to go and find him and maybe rough him up and it took years and God only knows what, then why would I want to be part of a system that would do that to somebody else? So yes, it's hard. Yes, we have to continue to check in. And I know that Chazal, our sages, didn't say, I have some moral issue with the way that the Torah says that a teenager should be put to death. They didn't say that. I'm surmising. And what right do I have to surmise? I'm just surmising on the basis of what they did, that came from their moral sensibility. So I don't think that the fact that morality might differ from generation to generation means that we give up our sacred responsibility to distinguish between cases so that we could create the kinds of world for other people that we ourselves would want to live in.
Just a quick question, Rabbi Stecker, because I know we're getting late. Do you believe that there were homosexuals in the day of Hillel?
Yes.
Okay. Do you believe that since your morality seems to be defined by Hillel, which you've said, that Hillel agrees with your perspective on homosexual behavior?
So first of all, I know the statements that are attributed to Hillel. There's a statement attributed to Hillel, that which is offensive to you, don't do to somebody else. That much I know. I do not have the luxury of interviewing him about what he feels about human behavior.
Make a guess.
Make a guess?
Take a guess.
My guess would be that he would not have wanted to make an accommodation. But I will say this. The notion of an orientation, and we had said we don't want to devote the entire time to this, the notion of an orientation as opposed to a human being who just chooses to act is probably a relatively recent understanding of human sexuality. I think that we are speaking about a time when people did this or did that, and there was no sense of an overarching orientation. So I do think that that is different. I don't know how Hillel would respond to that today. Can I ask you, though, Rabbi Polakov, do you believe that the Orthodox community has done enough to alleviate the incredibly tragic and painful circumstances that many women who are in marriages that they want to leave have not been able to leave?
It's a great question. I appreciate your honesty about your view on Hillel. I agree with you. He probably would not have taken your position on this. And I believe that we are living in this challenging time of agunot precisely because we as a Jewish community have chosen to live in a diaspora subject to laws of governing bodies that are not at all sensitive to our halakhic concerns. If we lived in Israel, you would not have these issues. A husband who refuses to give his wife a get in Israel is placed in jail. That doesn't happen here in America. It does happen in Israel. So yes, if you want to live in a society that is sensitive to halachic norms, so then we can pick ourselves up and we can go and live in Israel, because otherwise we are bound by the secular laws of the society in which we live. Being bound by the secular laws of the society in which we live has a cost to it. In some communities, in some places in the world, the laws of shechita, of ritual slaughter of animals, has been outlawed. How the Jews who live in those societies are stuck in those societies, and they have to bring in meat that meets their religious requirements from other places. The society in which we choose to live and the secular laws of that society do indeed have an impact on us. And yes, it is true that to a certain extent, Orthodox hands are tied as to how much we can do to relieve the suffering of agunot. We are tied by the fact that we are living in a secular society that does not allow us to implement some of the solutions which the rabbis had come up with when they lived in autonomous societies. But that is the price that we pay willingly to live in this society.
So thank you. Yeah, it's we're a little over time. So here's what I want to do. I want to take the personal privilege of just because of being the host. I want to give my last answer, and then we will end. Is that okay? Well, because we went till supposed to go to 11:30. So okay. So with the consent, is that okay? Okay, all right, thank you. So what I just want to say on this question, because I love this and it also highlights another key difference that I can say. And it goes back to Rabbi Polikoff, you said at the very beginning about in Orthodoxy, we believe in Torah min hashamayim. The Torah is God's revelation. So as a Reformed Jew, here's how I see it. I agree with you that Hillel had the opportunity to to address homosexuality differently, and he didn't. But I think maybe a little bit unlike Rabbi Stecker, I feel no need to defend him or justify him on that. Why? Because Hillel lived in a different time. And Hillel's understanding of the world and of human nature and biology and all these things were just different than the. I think I did kind of say that, but that's okay. Yeah, but I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, and I think this is where maybe we differ a little, is that I'm perfectly okay not having to justify the sages. In other words, I don't feel an obligation to prove that the sages were right when they were actually wrong. Hillel was wrong. Why? Because he had different knowledge than we do. Okay, maybe he was right for his time. One of the founding fathers of Reform Judaism in Germany in 19th century, Rabbi Samuel Holtheim, said as much. He was considered a radical in his time, but I like it, and I think it really describes where we are today as Reformed Jews. Rabbi Holtheim said, in the time of the Talmud, I have to paraphrase it because I'm trying to remember. Okay, so he says, the Talmud existed in a particular time, was created in a particular time, and for its time, the Talmud was right. I live in a different time where I have more knowledge and understanding of things through science, and for my time, I am right. And with that, we will conclude our dialogue.